Welcome back to Mr. Scare. For today's episode, I have a compilation of scary campfire stories that would be perfect for our favorite spooky Halloween season. So leave a like, comment and tell me if you believe in the existence of the paranormal or cryptids. And meanwhile, I'll begin reading the stories. I still remember that the house I lived in the past was beyond haunted, though we never saw anything physically. When we first moved in, we were redoing the floor in the kitchen and the main bedroom. My husband would leave for the office, and I would be left alone in this house with no furniture or floors, and hence nothing to do. I can't explain it, but when I was alone in that bedroom at night, I felt the most mind-numbing fear you could ever think of. I could not stay in that room. One fine night, I dashed out of the house at 4 a.m. after my husband had left, and slept in my car with my dog until I could see daylight. And that was just the first experience. A week or so later, when the house was finished, we moved all the furniture in and I began sleeping in my new bedroom that was across the house. A friend and her husband moved in with us, and the boys went away for their U.S. Marine training for 2 weeks, leaving us girls to fend for ourselves. The first night, my friend comes running into my bedroom, asking to sleep with me because she claimed that her bed was shaking. I laughed it off thinking she was probably just sleepwalking, and let her sleep beside me. Not more than 15 minutes had passed, and my bed started shaking as if an earthquake had hit. We stayed completely frozen and waited for it to stop. The next night, we experienced the same thing again. Night after night our beds would shake and we would be terrified. Mind you, her bedroom was the one that I had slept in when we had first moved in. The same room where I felt the mind-numbing fear. She refused to sleep in there alone. She said she would also hear something like fingernails in the closet or scratching from the ceiling all the way to the floor. Another night she went to sleep with her closet door closed and her fan off. She woke up an hour later to her door open and the fan on. Another night she was in my bathroom and I was in my bedroom when both lights got cut. We figured, okay, the old house, so it must be the power outage. We made our way down the hallway and started flipping switches. Every other light in the house worked, except the 2 rooms we were in. I called my father, asking for help, since he was an electrician. Everything was working perfectly, yet still, no lights. After 20 minutes of arguing with my father that we were not going back into that room, we finally walked back into my room when both lights magically came back on. We set up a video camera one night around Halloween of last year, hoping to capture something. We positioned it on my kitchen table, pointing down the hallway to my bedroom. The first video had shadows crossing the walls, even when no one was around, and the picture would randomly distort and become fuzzy, then become clear again. We fully charged the camera and set it up to run for the next 4 hours. In the video, you can see my ex-husband and I walk down the hall and go into our bedroom, and when we turned off the light, the video stops. The battery was dead after 6 minutes of video and a full charge. Months later, we were having a bonfire with a bunch of my ex-husband's friends. The boys all came into the house to grab some food and beer. Clark was the first out the door and came screaming back into the house. Everyone just kind of stared at him like he was crazy and asked what had happened. He swore up and down he'd seen 3 men in Civil War uniforms standing around the fire. Clark certainly wasn't drunk, but he was scared out of his mind. Activity slowed down after that, and just little things here and there would happen. Whatever it was, it got used to us and turned from scaring us to playing jokes on the new people who came over to spend the night. Their things would go missing, and the couch or bed they were sleeping on would shake, but my bed never did again. It almost became a joke around the house. We never did see anything though. I like to keep on asking my mom about her side of the family, as I've never really gotten a chance to meet any of them. Most of them have passed away, or are just not good people, I suppose. Anyway, she told me this story where she had received a phone call from her mom. My grandmother was telling my mom about how much she missed her, how she wished she could see my brother being born, and just the sorts of things a mother would talk about. However, there was this existential dread over the conversation and feelings of lament. The conversation ended fairly abruptly, with my grandmother saying it was time for her to say goodbye. After hanging up, my mom woke up and then realized that her mom has been dead. She believes she was actually in contact with her. It's a chilling story and makes me wish I could have met my grandparents on my mom's side, but they had both been done in by cancer before I was born. Which leads me to another story about a clock. I don't have all the details on this clock, but basically, it would start winding counterclockwise when someone had passed. The clock would start spinning counterclockwise every now or so, and they would get a little chuckle out of it, not really believing that it did so when someone dies. My grandmother had a hard fight against breast cancer, and sure enough, when she passed, the clock started turning counterclockwise. It still gives me the chills thinking about it. The way my mom says it, her dad got so upset at the clock, he threw it across the room and broke it. It's very strange and I don't have all the details, but damn do they entertain the imagination. This happened to me about 2 years ago. My fiancé and I live in a 2-story house with my dog, Benny. One night, my dog goes downstairs at about 3 in the morning, presumable to go to the bathroom. All of a sudden he starts freaking out. He never barks at night, so I immediately go to see as to what the problem is. He's barking and hopping around at the doggy door, which is swaying like something just went through. The doggy door leads to a small side yard, which is basically just a dog run. Now I thought, there's a 50-50 chance that was just the wind, or maybe he just pawed at it before I came down. Anyways, my fiancé is now scared shitless, so I grab a flashlight and put on shoes, and go out into the front yard. I look around. There was nothing. I flash my light in the side yard. Nothing again. Now that was weird. I go back to the front door to tell Benny to calm down and go back to sleep. And that was when something in my mind went, stop. I pause. I listen. Something in my mind was screaming at me to check the side yard again. I walk around to the front of the side yard via the front yard, and this time I slowly sweep the pitch black side run with my flashlight. Pressed up against the wall like a fucking slug is a middle-aged white guy dressed in complete black, like he's crawling along the ledge of a 20-story building. He's staring straight at me, his eyes gleaming from the light of my flashlight. My mind goes into flight or fight. I shout, "What the heck are you doing in my yard?" He listens and then walks toward me. We're currently separated by a large gate that separates the dog run from the front yard.
I just got lost, man. Let me out. I'm just lost. I was looking for Stacy's house.
I puzzle it out quickly. Benny had been jumping the fence of our dog run, so we installed extra high fence posts along the gate and side. It effectively makes it impossible to open the gate from the inside, so once he was in our dog run, he was essentially in prison. I look at him dead in his eyes.
You're not going anywhere.
I tell my fiancé to call the cops. About this time I realize he's totally drunk. When he figures out I'm not letting him go, he throws his body against my wooden fence until several posts snap and he stumbles down the street. The cops found him 2 hours later. He was stumbling around in an elementary school parking lot without his pants on. They never found the pants, but he got a significant fine for his act. I don't have any particular way to verify whether this is actually a family story or whether it's an urban legend, but I'll let you weigh in. We were having a family dinner in late October, just before Halloween. Each one shared real stories that they had heard or experienced themselves. My family has lived in rural Nebraska since they immigrated from Germany in the mid-1800s. Near the turn of the century, the disease was pretty rampant in the homesteading area, and it killed off members of almost every family. When someone died from illness, time was of the essence in burying them so as not to let the virus spread from the deceased to the living individuals. This meant no wait periods. So some great-great-aunt in relationship to me dies of some disease and she gets buried in the family cemetery on the homestead. The dogs were very fond of her, so it wasn't too surprising that after the funeral, the 2 dogs were stuck near the grave. The rest of the family began to think something of it, when a week and a half later, the dogs were still visiting her grave, almost constantly. But they weren't just at the grave. They were visibly distressed, frantic, and often barking while there. This goes on for maybe 2 weeks when the family decides to check it out. They dig the casket up and open it. The deceased's hair has all been pulled out. Her fingers are raw and bloody, and mangled from where, on the inside of the casket door, they can see deep scratches in the wood. She was comatose when they buried her, and she came to life while underground, spending probably her last 5 or so days alive in a buried casket. I've never shared this story before, and I'm guessing it will be sounding made up. But this is my genuinely terrifying childhood experience. I have my share of believable creepy stuff that's happened to me, but this is paranormal-ish, and I'm always somewhat uneasy about sharing it because, as a skeptic, I'd normally call this kind of story bullshit. Just like my parents and friends would tell me. I was always the kid that made up stories, but this one is real. I shared a room with my sister around the age of 8, but she was off at a sleepover party the night it happened. As a little kid, I was terrified of countless things. I'd never seen anything close to a horror film because of how jumpy I was. So naturally, the dark freaked me out. I was really nightmare prone, which caused everyone to say later that this too was a dream. But this was different. It was more vivid. In fact, it was far too realistic to be a dream. I was hiding under my sheets like the cowardly kid I was, when I decided to poke my head out to get some cool air, and I saw something in my room. Something clearly not human. I called it an alien at the time, because that's the closest thing my horror-ignorant mind could assume it to be. Now, I see it as more similar to the rake or the Mothman. Its head was big and egg-shaped, like those stereotypical gray aliens. Far too big for its tiny, slender body. It was totally naked. I could see a hint of pale gray skin. The lack of light made it hard to tell. All the bones were visible. Its tiny shriveled sack and penis just hung there between its legs. Its hands were way too big for the toothpick-like arms. It was standing at a really unnatural angle. The eyes were totally black and shiny, and that seemed to be the only feature on its weird head, and were sunken in little red holes. The most unsettling of all was that it was just staring at me endlessly. After a few seconds of being completely paralyzed in fear, I pulled the covers back up over my head, because what else could I do? I stayed there for the rest of the night, until I fell asleep. I know this thing wasn't human. I told my parents the next day, and they said I was dreaming. I made up a lot of stories back then. I remember a lot of them vividly, and the rest of my childhood is really, really hazy. But seeing that thing in my room is one of the childhood memories that stuck with me the most. I have no idea what it was, and despite my fascination with horror stories, I don't think I want to know. My roommate somehow procured a somewhat large amount of weed for an obscenely low price. The buds were alright, but nothing super special, so she decided that instead of smoking it, she is going to make ridiculous amounts of THC-infused cookies. I watched as she made some very, very strong ganja butter. I ate one of her cookies and had an awesome trip, full of all the things you wish marijuana still did to you. A few days later, I was home watching a movie with a girl, and my 3 roommates come home with 2 other people. One of these people I know, and the other I have never seen in my life. I take the girl home after the movie ends and come back home. I am offered a cookie and I downed it as quickly as I could muster. Apparently, my roommates all had one and the 2 visitors split one. About 20 minutes later, the guy I don't know, let's call him Brian, starts to show symptoms of being a little too high. This isn't seen as a problem, because it's usually not a problem and the person just goes to sleep. Now, this isn't enough for Brian, and he begins to freak out. We offer him water and a room in which he can lie down. He takes up the offer and disappears into the back of the house. We continue watching 30 Rock or whatever, and a little later, we notice voices coming from the back. Brian's friend, to who we will refer Clint, investigates the matter and discovers that he is on the phone with the police. He apparently has told the dispatcher that he has been poisoned and is trapped in our house. At this point, he runs into our living room in his boxers and storms outside. We stare at each other and chase him down. We can't be having a crazy pants-free 20-something parading himself outside our house at 9 at night. While he is gone, my roommate picks up the phone and tries to clear things up. By this point, all the dispatcher wants is an address so she can send a police car. We hide some of our other evidence not involved in this situation in my room, but intentionally left the cookies on the table. The cops show up and look like they have an itchy arresting arm, just ready to take someone down to the station. But before they could get more than 2 words out, Brian careens around the corner and almost runs into them. He is shocked at first, but then does something that might sound unbelievable. He actually tapped the officer's belt, pretended to have stolen his gun, and then points the fake gun at the officers and pretended to shoot. By this point, we were all baked as hell and all screaming inside our own heads.
Don't shoot him in our house. Oh my God, he is going to get shot in our house.
But, to the officer's credit, they did not freak out or even react to this, because he was so visibly fucked up in the head right now. Brian then tries to run away, but they tackle him and then throw him on the couch. They ask us what he has taken, and we respond truthfully, a half a marijuana cookie. They asked if we had taken a cookie as well, and we admitted that we'd had. They asked us who made them, and we hesitantly told them that we ourselves had made them. I was fully expecting to get searched and dragged off to prison. I had succumbed to this fact, and everything I did from that point on was an attempt to just not make things worse. But Brian had a different idea. He was so fucked up that he began yelling things about Jesus and was kicking at the officers. We had to reassure them many times that all he had was half a marijuana cookie. It got so bad that they had to call for backup. It got even worse, so they had to call an ambulance. When the paramedics arrived, they bumped our count of uniformed personnel in our house to 12. After a few minutes of the police explaining what's going on, one of the paramedics pulls out a needle and sticks it into Brian's naked leg and reassures him this will just make him feel good and then go to sleep. The effects obviously are not instant, because 30 seconds later Brian is screaming his fucking head off again. They strap him to a gurney and wheeled him out. Now, at no time during this did the cops ever ask for a name, number, ID, or anything from any of us. They didn't search the house or do anything. Well, as the medics left, the cops left too, offering only one piece of advice.
No more cookies for this guy.
When I was about 12, my mom and dad invited our previous neighbors from the block of flats we lived in until I was 6 years old. I was just home from trick-or-treating, and I was tired. So I was in my bed, but I could still hear everyone talking about random stuff until the woman who was my neighbor asked my mom,
"Do you remember when Mark used to complain that there was someone in his room? Well, there's a family that's just moved into the floor above who have a 3-year-old son. He's complaining about the exact same things Mark said."
This creeped me out. I had no recollection of any of this, so the next day asked my mom. Her first reaction was,
"You don't remember?"
And then she told me all about the weird stuff that used to happen, footsteps up and down the hall, shit going missing, and stuff. She said the final thing to happen was when she was listening to a record one day, and it started to slow down, like someone was holding a finger gently on the platter till it finally came to a stop. My mom said she snapped at this point and started shouting,
"Leave us alone!"
As soon as she said this, the record went straight back to playing normally, and we never experienced anything again. I've never experienced anything like that since, and these days I'm quite skeptical of such stories, but I believe my mom. The strangest thing is how I found out about it, from someone else 10 years later experiencing something similar. And one freakish coincidence is that I walked past my old house that night with my elder brother, and the house was empty. But I felt like someone was watching me. Maybe the entity living in that house recognized its old resident,